Welcome to Days of Roar, the Detroit Tigers podcast, brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. My name's Mark Borash. I am here with Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold, straight from Lakeland, straight from watching many spring training baseball games. How you doing down there, brother?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, man. It is a lot of spring training games, and you look up at the calendar and you realize opening day on March 28th, that's not too far away now. And the Tigers have had some roster moves. Some decisions have been made about certain players, and more of those decisions are going to be coming soon. So it does seem like it's been, a lot of spring training games now that we've seen a handful of guys in the rotation, go a number of times. And we're starting to see some hitters have, more than 20 plate appearances under their belt. And like I said, you look up and you realize opening day is right around the corner. So it's coming fast.
Yep. And, also people like me, people in Detroit have got a lot more access recently. There were a few ball games on TV this week. If you knew where to find them and how to watch them, there were even a few on a few of the teams' websites that you were able to look at. So I got a chance to watch a lot of baseball this week, not quite as much as Evan Petzold, both sitting behind the plate and behind the center field fence yesterday, taking video and sending them to me. But yeah, things are starting to shape up. You can start discerning a few things about a few players, other players still rounding into shape. I think there'll be a bunch of roster cuts that haven't happened already, probably in the next few days. Don't you think they're going to probably start thinning camp out a little bit more? Minor leaguers start reporting to camp they're already there, but they actually start playing games towards the end of this week, right?
Yeah, that's coming up soon. I think we're going to see a huge turnover inside that clubhouse, that big league spring training clubhouse. Tigers have already made some moves. Right-handed reliever Brendan White was optioned to AAA Toledo. Pitching prospects Jackson Jobe, a right-hander, Ty Madden, a right-hander, and Brant Herter, a left-hander, were reassigned to minor league camp, along with right-hander Garrett Hill and catcher Eliezer Alfonso. More cuts are going to be coming on Tuesday. I'm expecting a lot of guys to be optioned and reassigned. It sounds like this camp is going to be trimmed a lot quicker than previous AJ Hinch camps because the competition is better across the board. And look, if someone isn't going to make the team, there's no reason to keep them in the mix when playing time needs to be devoted to guys that the Tigers need to figure something out about. Whether it's we need to figure out about you for opening day, or can you be an option for us in April, or can you be an option for us in May? How about June if we need a call-up? Can you be that guy for us? So the guys that are in that mix are going to stick around a little bit longer. I was kind of thinking about it, and I said, maybe Akil Baddoo gets cut early because he's just not in the outfield mix. Actually, he probably sticks around just in case of an injury. But even then, you're probably taking Ryan Kryler over him anyway at this point, considering how many outfielders there are. So a better example of that might be Justice Bigbie. Probably more of a realistic third week cut, only because he's not making the team no matter what. I think Justin Henry Malloy is another who could be a surprise cut earlier than maybe some expect, just based off of his performance and where he's at and kind of how he fits. Like he's not really an option on this roster, and I'm not so sure that he becomes an option until some point in the summer unless there's a significant injury. So we'll see what happens, but I think this spring is going to have a much different feel as the roster shrinks because it's going to happen a lot quicker than in the past.
All right, so we have a special guest tonight. Why don't you tell everybody who that is? And on top of that, we're going to discuss a lot of these pitchers we've had a chance to take a look at later in the pod, but talk to everybody about who you wrangled as a special guest for this evening.
Yeah, we got Jason Benetti coming on the podcast, and really excited to have him on, the TV play-by-play voice of the Tigers. Mark, we have a lot to jump into, though, with the big two, don't we? And we had to tease Jason Benetti. That was a smart move by you because now people have to stick around, right? So, you got to listen to the big two if you want to get to Jason Benetti. There's no skips here.
All right. So we'll get to Benetti in a little while, but first we have to get to the big two. So question one of the big two, we're entering the third week of games, and a lot of guys projected for the opening day roster have struggled. Most of the time that's meaningless, by the way. What do you think the past 2 weeks mean for the 2024 season, if anything?
I want to feed that one right back to you to start, Mark. What do you think it means, if anything, as somebody from the outside looking in, right? Like I'm in camp day in, day out in the trenches, as somebody who's on the outside looking in, watching the games. I mean, are you seeing anything that's causing you to be concerned? Because the way that I look at it, I say, okay, who are regulars? And to me, I think regulars are big-time contributors. That's Cole Keefe, Javier Baez, Mark Hanna, Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson. Those are my guys. Parker Meadows may be in that mix, but I'm going to leave him out of there for now. So that's 5 guys I'm looking at. Right now, those 5 guys combined are hitting 183 with 0 home runs, a 9.4% walk rate, and a 29% strikeout rate. Spring training stats are meaningless. I think they are for individual players. That's why I lumped all those guys together. You don't know where all that production is coming from, but those 5 big-time contributors, they're hitting 183. And I've heard a number of times in Tigers camp from different people, we're really going to need some offense. We're really going to have to score runs. I mean, the pitching might be great. The defense might be great. But runs are going to have to be scored for this team to win. I've heard that from people in the organization, from people out of the organization, and from people just around baseball that have said, look, the Tigers need more offense. They need to score runs. So, Mark, does it give you any concern that those 5 guys, Cole Keefe, Javier Baez, Mark Hanna, Riley Green, and Spencer Torkelson, are hitting 183 with 0 home runs right now?
I'm going to use a beat writer's word here, a word that writers like to use because it adds flavor to any story. Let's use the word context, okay? So for some people, it's important. For most people, it's not. For pitchers, it often is a little bit more important, especially young pitchers, because you may be wanting to see if they're working on something specific. As an example, we'll talk more about it later. I got to watch Ty Madden a couple of times this week. What stood out to me most about Ty Madden, besides the life on his fastball, was he threw 4 changeups out of 5 pitches today to, I forget who the hitter was he was facing, but not a bad hitter. But he threw 4 out of 5 pitches that were changeups. And all 4 of them were very good. It's not been a pitch that's been a very good pitch for Ty Madden.
And he needs it.
And it is a difference-making pitch for Ty Madden. And it was really good in the sequence and the repetitive nature of how they used it. So in that context, was spring training important? Damn right it is. It shows progress from a pitcher that is a changeup away from being really useful if need to be called upon during the season, okay? He's more than just a fastball in the minor leagues that's impressive. He's now somebody that might be able to get a major league hitter out, okay? Now, a bunch of hitters that are struggling, well, look, does it concern you? It only concerns you in the context of the following. Why are they struggling? Are they on time? Are they not on time? Are they hitting the ball hard and making outs, i.e., 2023 spring training Spencer Torkelson? Or are they late? Are they not making contact on time? Or are they not making contact at all? Okay. Do I love the swings I see from Mark Hanna lately? No. Do I think at 35 years old, we need to not really pay much attention to that? Probably. Maybe this week we'll pay a little more attention to it because it's early in March. He has 35 or 40 more at bats before we get to the season, and he's going to play more and more and more. So some of the things concern you, some things don't concern you yet. It's all a matter of context. Is it concerning that Justin Henry Malloy has done absolutely nothing when he really needed to be impressive? And most of the time, he's swinging against lesser caliber, mostly minor league pitchers, and he's starting less and less. Yeah, I'd probably be a little concerned if I was Justin Henry Malloy. I think your opportunity for 2024 and spring training's probably passed you by, and you're getting sent out this week. So, like I said, context. You think that's a fair way to discuss it or not?
I think so. And first, I just want to give you the hat tip on Ty Madden. That's That's smart that you picked up on that. I mean, the changeup is a work in progress, and it is a pitch he needs if he wants to be a legit, big league starter. Like if that's his future, that's the pitch that he needs. As for the hitters, I'm with you on that one. I kind of have a rule here in spring training. You can be worried about Javier Baez, but not anybody else on the list because Javi Baez is doing the same stuff. We talked about it last week. It's frustrating for sure. But for a guy like Riley Green, let's look at him for an example. And he's been pretty good so far this spring, but I think he's a perfect example of process. And he talked a lot about it on Sunday after he has this game that he plays in, and he has 2 doubles, both of them to the pull side. Both of them got in the air a little bit, maybe not as much as he would like. The first one is an up and in fastball, high velocity. The second one is a down and in changeup, low velocity. So he gets around on the first one, which is like a high velocity fastball, up and in. Like that was a really good sign. That tells you that he has his timing down. To be able to turn on a fastball up and in and shoot it, down the line, like that's a great sign. To get it to the pull side, I like what I see there. That tells me a lot. So he hits the ball with 112 mile an hour exit velocity, a 19-degree launch angle. This is what's really fascinating. There were 11 balls in play like that last season. 112 miles an hour off the bat, 19-degree launch angle. 6 doubles, 5 home runs. Now, Green hit a single because it hit the warning track, bounced off the wall, and ricocheted back to the right fielder. But here's what I think is interesting. Let's say it's 112 mile an hour exit velocity with a 20-degree launch angle. So just one more degree of launch angle. That was 10 balls in play last season, 1 double, 9 home runs. So essentially with one more degree of launch in that situation, Riley Green would have most likely had a home run in the 4th inning of Sunday's game against the Mets. And that's what makes all this so interesting because he decided to talk about his struggles about getting the ball in the air. That's something that he struggled with for a long time, especially to the pull side. Riley Green said, quote, "Trying to get the ball in the air is my goal. I'm tired of hitting the ball on the ground. I'm trying to get the ball in the air with pure spin and hit it hard," end quote. Now, the hitting coaches are working with Green to try to help him understand what specific pitches he can hit in the air for power as opposed to him trying to hit everything. But I think that's a perfect example of a guy who is going through a process trying to figure something out. Riley Green wants to get the ball in the air to the pull side. He wants to become more of that type of hitter who can get to that launch angle. Even go back to last season. I think, why does this matter? Well, it's because you go back and you look at what he did last year. Only 28% of his balls in play to all parts of the field had at least a 20-degree launch angle. That was behind Torkelson at 47%, Carpenter at 39%. So you have Kerry Carpenter, Spencer Torkelson getting the ball in the air with over a 20-degree launch angle, way more than Riley Green. And is it any surprise that Torkelson and Carpenter hit more home runs? Absolutely not. So that's an example of a guy who's working through a process. It might not be timing, but it might be trying to figure out what pitches can I hit and get them into the air to the pull side. That's what Riley Green's going through right now. He worked on it a lot last season, saw some developments, but now it's time for him to take that next step. That's the difference between Riley Green being a 15-homer guy and a 30-homer guy. And I think it's an example of why we can't look too much at spring training stats because guys are focused on things like this. Like that, this is such a complex thing, and he's trying to iron it out in spring training. That takes time, and you can't look at the results.
This is exactly why I hope people listen to Days of Roar, because where else can you understand, A, what Riley Green's working on, the subtlety of what he's working on, and why he is working on it. You and I actually were having this discussion in some DMs prepping for the pod tonight, and I even said to you, just based upon how I've watched the progress of his swing this week, I thought he would get the ball in the air more this coming week, and I thought he'd at least hit 1, if not 2 homers this week. So Riley has always been a work in progress, hitting the ball hard to the pull side and hitting the ball in the air. He has some ridiculously high ground ball percentage rates in his history. Did a much better job of that during the course of the season last year after getting off to a dismal start, hitting the ball on the ground way too much. But I expect him to really improve upon that. The rest of the hitters that are really struggling, I think we're going to pay closer attention to that this week. I think everybody knows who they are. If not, just check the stats. Guys are going to start getting 3 at-bats in a game starting this week. And, you need to face pitching to hone your timing. So we'll pay attention to that. I'm sure we'll talk more about it next week. So Let's get to question 2, the big 2. What's the latest on the big starting pitcher competition? You got 3 guys for 2 spots. Matt Manning, Casey Mize, Reese Olsen, all through this week. All had something interesting go on. Tell me what you saw. Let's first start with Matt Manning. What'd you see?
Matt Manning has been really good for 3 starts in a row. He's maintaining his swing and miss and his strikeouts, which is great to see. The 2 slider shapes, I think that's awesome. He's added the harder slider back into the mix. And then he has the new splitter as well, which is a variation of what his changeup used to be, but it's a splitter grip. He's called it a changeup and then just recently called it a changeup splitter or whatever. So he's somewhere in between what he wants to call it, but it's a splitter. I think that's a really good pitch for him. It's a really good pitch for him against lefties. He wants to use more of it against righties. I think that's going to be interesting to see over his next 2 starts here in spring training, is how he uses that splitter against right-handed hitters. But against lefties, the splitter has been really good. And then the 2 sliders have been solid as well. I think the fastball is playing up even more because the secondary stuff is so much better, right? So that allows him to get whiffs with the fastball. This is the most complete version of Matt Manning in a Tigers uniform. A guy that's able to now use his fastball, which has always been a really good fastball, but now he's able to use it to go get whiffs. He can go get strikeouts. He doesn't have to shy away from using that pitch where he has to maybe rely on the slider so much to try to get his swing and miss. He can go to the fastball and get his swing and miss with it. I think that's really impressive. He's only able to do that, though, because the secondary stuff is better. We talked a lot about Matt Manning being stubborn in the past. I want to tip my cap to Matt Manning because from what I was told, he was the most dialed in and the most locked in with the pitching coaches throughout the offseason. And we were talking about Matt Manning being stubborn, not wanting to change and, not wanting to make any adjustments. And sure, maybe he had been like that for a while, but he was not like that this offseason. He did show up to camp like he made some big time changes, and we're seeing it in the results. And as to the other guys, I think it comes down to Casey Mize and Reese Olsen for that last spot. I think Matt Manning, with what we've seen, I think he's got to be locked in. I really do. The stuff is just so much better that it needs some runaway. It really does. Matt Manning's only given up 4 hits, all 4 of them in home runs. That's not going to stay the same. Matt Manning does not give up home runs. That's not something that, he's been notorious for. So I think he's locked in, and it really comes down to Casey Mize and Reese Olsen. Now, Mize struggled with his command for the first 2 games, but he got better in his 3rd game. He was pitch efficient in the 1st and 2nd innings before a really long 3rd inning. But still, I thought it was a big step forward for him. He finished that start with a 97-mile-an-hour fastball for a strikeout on a check swing. That's a really, really good sign. Also threw some good splitters. I still want to see a better version of his slider, but he's confident putting hitters away with his fastball and his splitter, which means he doesn't need to rely on his slider as much because of the improvements with the fastball. That's another example of a guy improving his fastball, and the Tigers have seen that across the board. So I like that with Casey Mize. He's challenging hitters with the fastball. That's something that he wasn't able to do in the past, and now he's able to do it. Reese Olsen obviously is the other guy in the mix. He's gotten better with each start. Walking in his command, he's been really good in his past 2 starts. I think it was just the first start that was a complete train wreck, which he chalked up to first game nerves. Changeup's been good. I want to see more sliders for strikeouts, but he's doing a good job of mixing his pitches to get to 2 strike counts, meaning he hasn't been predictable. Fastball depends on the locations. We know that. We've talked about it. But if he locates, he can attack with every pitch he has inside the strike zone. So I don't know. That's kind of what I got on these 3 pitchers. It's been a really good competition for the final 2 spots in the rotation. I think most of the time when you have one of these competitions in camp, somebody forces themselves out of the mix because of bad performance. That's not happening here. The Tigers are pretty internally surprised. They're pleasantly surprised, don't get me wrong. But internally, I think there's a little bit of a surprise because you had expected maybe one of these guys to work their way out of the mix. You had expected maybe there to be an injury that pops up. Knock on wood. But everyone's staying healthy, and these guys are all battling. They're competing like their job's on the line, and it is.
Yeah. You got to love the fact that Manning's finally, after 6 years, missing some bats so far this spring. I did notice his velo was down about 1.5 miles from what it had been in the first 2 outings. I think we're probably starting to get to the part of spring training where there's a little dead arm starting to go on. We'll see. I noticed Miguel Diaz velo was way down today. So I don't think he's the only one suffering from some of that. It'll be interesting to see his next outing, what his velocity is at. The split, total difference makers. I noticed our buddies, a bunch of them from Pitchers List, who really is really good at interpreting data, have all noticed that Manning is throwing better and different pitches. Reese Olsen, last 5 innings, really, really good. So as far as Casey Mize goes, I think Hinch said it best. He wanted to see Mize get in trouble and pitch his way out of it. He got dinged around a little bit a few times, finished with a 97-mile-an-hour fastball to get himself out of it. Not something we've really seen from Casey Mize too often. So I think now we're going to start seeing guys throw 50 to 65 pitches in the next round. It's 4 to 5 innings, depending on how fast you're getting out. So this week should be pretty interesting stuff.
I do want to clarify something for people too. Tarek Skubal, Kenta Maeda, Jack Flaherty are locked in. Matt Manning, Casey Mize, Reese Olsen, they're competing for the final 2 spots. Here's kind of the update here, right? Okay, so for the pitcher who doesn't make it, they will be in the bullpen as a long reliever or in AAA Toledo as a starter, not as a tandem starter. So that was something that was tossed around as an idea that the Tigers might go with. That is no longer the case. It sounds like it's going to be a long reliever in the bullpen or a starter in AAA Toledo. The Tigers already have a lot of long relievers. Tyler Holton being one of them, possibly Bo Brisky, and possibly Joey Wentz. I think both those guys are going to be in the bullpen. So if that's the case, I would expect the pitcher who doesn't make the rotation to end up in the AAA Toledo rotation, which would make them the first call if there's an opening in the Tigers rotation. If I had to guess today, let's say that opening day started today, I would say Matt Manning and Casey Mize are in the rotation and Olsen gets sent to AAA Toledo. But I also think there's a world in which if Mize doesn't have the pinpoint command and a better slider in about 2 weeks, he goes down to Toledo to keep working. It'll be interesting to see how he would respond to that. But he's very well aware that he is in a competition. And he knows that in a competition, somebody loses. So if that's the case, that's the case. But we do know that the Tigers are going to use a ton of starting pitchers. There's no doubt about that, right? No team ever uses just 5 starters. So no matter who gets sent out or shuttled to the bullpen, I guess, if that ends up being the case, they're going to end up starting games for the Tigers in the 2024 season. But it's going to be an interesting, final stretch to see who makes this opening day rotation. We know Skubal's in, we know Maeda's in, we know Flaherty's in. Matt Manning looks like he's probably going to be in, but who's joining? We'll see.
There's a lot more spring training to go. Like I said, I think the next start for both of them, for all 3 of these guys, will show us a little bit more, probably the next two starts. So the next, 7 to 10 days are going to tell us a lot more than we know now. We were very, very fortunate that Evan was able to get Jason Benetti to sit down with us for a half hour. Hope to do it more than just this time, but it was pretty awesome. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, one of the best broadcasters in baseball, Jason Benetti.
All right, let's welcome play-by-play announcer Jason Benetti, the TV voice of the Detroit Tigers, to the Days of Roar podcast. Jason has worked at what seems like literally every big television company in the industry, all before turning 40, and somehow the Tigers managed to lure him away from the American League Central rival Chicago White Sox. Aside from national broadcasts, Jason worked as the White Sox TV play-by-play announcer from 2016 to 2013 before joining the Tigers in the same role for the 2024 season. Jason, thanks for joining the Days of Roar podcast. We are so lucky to have you.
I don't know about lucky. We'll find out in 25 or 30 minutes how lucky you are. I don't know.
Okay, then, hey, let's jump right into the hard-hitting question. Why'd you leave the White Sox and come to the Tigers?
Let's get after it, Evan. I like it. Thank you for the very nice introduction. Yeah, it's funny. I get a lot of, at basketball games, either we're going to miss you or like, hey, thanks for coming to Detroit. And everybody wants like the long version of the story. And the answer that I now have come upon after doing a couple Tigers games, this is going to sound a little PR-ish, and I'm happy to follow up and go beyond this. But the way I currently feel is Chicago meant a ton to me, and the fans still mean a lot to me, and what they did for me and how they supported our work and all of that. But I got to tell you, the Tigers have a dedication to caring about the broadcast They have people that are so open-minded to doing things on a telecast and just being creative and having a good time while also nailing the big moments, that this has become much less about where I left and much more about what I backed my way into. Like I would not have just left the White Sox for any other job. I swear to you, this is true. I would not have done Major League Baseball for another team if it weren't the right situation. And this ended up being a very right situation, I think, for both sides. I was so floored by the questions the Tigers asked me in the interview process, by what they want from the telecast, by how much they value good baseball conversation. To answer your question, the stuff you read about what happened in Chicago, like, yeah, there were some moments where I thought, like, do I really want to spend my entire life in a situation that, sometimes got contentious for what I thought was no apparent reason? And yes, that was part of the calculus. But then I started talking to these people in Detroit, and I was like, I have my answer. These people are people that I really do want to collaborate with and work with. And it just so happens that there's a manager that I respect greatly. There's a team president that is hyper curious. And, the thing about Scott Harris is he knows that not everything's going to be a success at all times. He just always has a strategy. And I respect that. I think kind of like the people who are around the Tigers. And I think we dovetail in part because we are curious people, if I can lump myself in that category. So that's a long answer, but it started with, there was some contentious stuff that happened and it was disappointing, but, I ended up being involved in an opening that didn't have to exist. And I'm glad it ended up existing.
For sure. And you've been pretty open about everything with the White Sox, everything about joining the Tigers, but now you're here. You're a Detroit guy now. And, you are signed up with the Tigers on a multi-year contract. That happened in November of 2023. The past 4 months of your life, both personally and professionally, especially recently as you're gearing up for, your first full season as the TV voice of the Tigers, what has that been like for you, both on a personal level and on a professional level?
I cannot tell you how excited I am to have done Tigers games now, because that limbo of you are the Tigers guy, you used to be the White Sox guy and all of that. And then there's speculation of what the broadcast is going to be like and how it's going to go and their expectations. And, I come with a reputation now, which is a very bizarre thing. Like when I got the White Sox job, very few people had any clue what I was and what I do. And now there's like 8 years of tape on me as a Major League Baseball announcer. I feel like a hitter that's like got to adjust. You know what I mean? Like everybody knows what I can hit and what I can't hit. So it is a totally different situation. But the last couple months have been on and off these reminders of substantial upheaval that I'm really excited about. But this was one of those moments in a life, and we all get to do this solely once, as far as I know at this point. We all get to only make these choices once at these crossroads. And I'm really happy that this happened, because I'm the type of person who encourages people to take chances. And I'm glad I did it myself, because there is inherent risk, but there's been a lot of I in this conversation. And that's not how I like to proceed most, because part of the reason I'm there is because of the group that I'm around. Like, I really did want to be a part of a thoughtful, analytical, interesting team. And part of the last 4 months has been getting excited to be around that every day.
Well, you've just gotten an opportunity to spend some time and do some broadcasts with a couple of your partners. Yesterday, you were with Carlos Pena. Got a chance to also interact quite a bit with Peaches, Dan Petrie. And earlier this week, you got a chance to do some stuff with Simo. How do you think it's going, and how long do you think it's going to take to sort of create some chemistry. I mean, you can't do it in the very first broadcast, but I think what you've done was really well received here in the last week. People were really excited by, how your broadcast goes. And why don't you share a little bit about what type of broadcast you like to do?
I'm disappointed you don't think we created chemistry on Monday and Thursday.
Oh, I think you did. I just think it's going to...
I'm kidding.
Right. It's going to take more than one game.
No, right. But I think if I were to distill like a style down to one word, I guess it would be range. I want our show, and I think the best shows in Major League Baseball, if you're talking about the Mets, the San Francisco Giants, depending on what your taste is, like people listening to that might be like, I hate those Mets guys because they said something negative about Prince Fielder. I don't know. But like, I revere the Mets because of their ability to do really, really important moments well. And then also when they're down 15, they literally just read from the media guide and pass it around because that's the tone for that situation. I think, especially in Major League Baseball, where there's an average audience that is older than the other major sports, but there is an importance on bringing in new, younger audiences as well. It's not just about this, but demographically, you want to be able to talk to everybody. I have to be able to talk to everybody. I mean, I get typecast every once and again as like an analytics guy, in part because I did the StatCast show at ESPN and in part because I wear glasses, I think. But like, it's not just one thing that the best shows can do. And so if we are going to be in that pantheon of best shows, I think it's about being able to like last night as we tape this, which it was Thursday night, there was a 3-6-3 double play and Carlos Pena, like when the replay came on, he went after it, like aggressive, charged the ball analysis on that replay. And I thought it was fascinating and awesome. And we did kind of a deep dive on how Torque used his footwork and the angle of the throw. And Peaches came in from downstairs about the angle of the throw. And then an inning later, we're talking about Franklin Herman's car that Bobby Higginson stole, which I did not know was coming. And I'm very glad that we had the conversation because it's ridiculous. But I think the best shows can do that inning by inning, and the tone is right for all of them. But if you get too stale, people notice very quickly. So I think what we want as a group is range. And that's where I kind of think it's cool that we have multiple analysts. I loved having one partner in Chicago with Gordon jumping in for Stoney for 20 games or so. But it was Jason and Steve and Jason, right? Everybody knew what they were going to get. I kind of think in this day and age, especially with what players made in the last generation, it's going to be harder to get somebody for 162. And I actually think it serves the audience better to have multiple people. And I also think it's going to be really cool when I jump out to go do other stuff and Dan comes in to do television. That's going to be an entirely different telecast that people will love as well, because Dan is phenomenal.
Yeah, Dan's a legend. But, as years have gone on, you talk about evolving your broadcast style and the things you integrate into a broadcast. Dickerson is a perfect example of that. I mean, he has evolved into using so much data discussion as part of explaining the game on a daily basis. And I know that's something you're very fluent on. And we're going to probably hear a lot more stuff once the season starts and there actually is data to discuss more. It's hard to discuss that much data in a spring training game unless you have Savant open during the game, which I'm sure you do. But, that is something that I don't think was as active a part of the television broadcast. And the contrast was it was a huge part of the radio broadcast. Interestingly enough, lastly, you haven't done a game with Gibby yet. Gibby's actually really good at data, analytics, subtle facts. He thinks like a manager in the booth. And hopefully that'll be, you'll bring more out in that from him. It was a part of his game early, I think, as a broadcaster, not as much in the last, couple of years. And I'm excited to hear that from him again.
Yeah, I agree that there is such a place now. I'm not huge on conveying things that don't apply to the situation. Like, I'm not going to go out of my way, and this is an oversimplification, this answer, but I'm not just going to go out of my way to say somebody's war because I think it's better to say war. You know what I mean? Like, I want to talk about, like we did, early in the game on Monday, about like Josh Winkowski's ground ball rate and how that might apply to today's game. Like, if they're talking about it as a factor in the clubhouse to how they're preparing for the game, or how my analyst would prepare for the game, I think we're going to talk about it because it helps you anticipate what's about to happen. But I do think it's really important that it applies to the situation at hand, which again is an oversimplification. But there is a distinction. Sometimes when you do an analytics driven show, there's a tendency to want to over deliver that and just say we're doing it. That was one of the hallmarks of that StatCast show that Eduardo Perez and Mike Petriello and I did at ESPN, is like, it wasn't going on the screen unless it was relevant to what that player's skill set is specifically. Like, what makes that person good? We want it on a graphic. And I've been fortunate enough to work with people who are willing to do that.
So, lastly on this topic, I mean, do you think that fans are interested in knowing that a guy like Alex Lang has a low how first pitch strikes affect his outcomes? As an example, I mean, when he throws a first pitch strike, he's almost unhittable, as are most pitchers, but it really impacts somebody like him, or what type of pitches. All that data is now available. Is that stuff that, as the season goes on, that you'll like to share with the audience, or is that, you think that's too deep a dive?
If it's going to make it clearer what the game's going to look like today, we'll do it. I don't think it's too deep of a dive if you convey it in a way that makes sense to people. I mean, I am very sensitive to the idea that people don't. There's a wide swath of the audience that does not want to come home and have to go to a museum while they're watching baseball. Right? I have a friend who says, no learning on vacation. Right. And that's like their rule for their traveling. And I understand that from some people, but there are also people who get into this game based on numbers, who have a science brain, who comprehend that better. So that's why I lean on range, because I think we have to have all of it. And again, that's an easy answer. But in execution, I think you will see that on a given day of our telecast, the criticism one day could be, well, it's too zany. And then the next day it could be, well, they're too in the weeds about numbers. Then the next day it could be, wow, they're dry today. Yeah, that's good. If you can say that today is different than tomorrow, is different than the next day over the course of 162, for me, in my heart, I think you have to do that as a telecast in order to just surprise people. I mean, I really don't think it gets talked enough that when Major League Baseball was first on television, you're not competing with anything other than what's in your time slot. And there weren't games on television at all times. In Hollywood, and it's a bit of a sore subject because of the writers' strike that happened, but in Hollywood, they have like a 10-person writers' room coming up with reasons for us to watch Breaking Bad or Succession or the new season of Curb, right? Like, they have a ton of people trying to build characters. We are fortunate because we have characters every day, but we don't have 10 writers developing storylines. We have us. And so we have to be creative in keeping up the pace, because we all know when our favorite sitcom gets stale. And then we suddenly are like, oh man, I like Ross and Rachel again. Like, they're really going to do that again to us? Oh, great. It's Emily. Oh, great. Oh, Monica and Chandler. Like, at some point you're like, all right. That's why the phrase jump the shark exists.
That's incredible. Jason, that is incredible. I'm a huge Friends guy, by the way, so that's right up my alley. But I want to switch gears on you, and I want to tell you something that AJ Hinch said about you. You were there when he said it, but I want to reiterate it to our listeners. Here's what AJ Hinch said about you. Quote, "He's going to be the voice of the Tigers for years to come. It's a cool thought to know that as we try to get better, we have somebody in the booth like Jason to tell our stories." End quote. First off, what does that mean to you? Secondly, what do you think about the Tigers in 2024? From the established manager in AJ Hinch to the young roster with Torkelson, Green, Carpenter, Cy Young potential, type guy in Tarek Skubal, and then also the progressive front office led by Scott Harris. Like, what do you think about what we're looking at with the Tigers as a whole in 2024, and how much did that comment from AJ Hinch mean to you?
Well, number one, bribery is easier with private Venmo transactions. So you never know exactly what made that happen. No, I have always revered AJ and what he has in his brain. I got to know him in 2016, my first year with the White Sox. Steve Stone and I went down and sat in his office for 20 minutes, and I could just immediately tell that he's different. He's different than typical baseball managers. And I will tell you that it means the world to me that he thinks that about me and the way I go about my business. The thing to me that's most, and I'll answer your question about the Tigers, but I do think this is fascinating about AJ. When I travel around, do college football or college basketball, I get a lot of mileage out of asking players what a good impression of their coach has to include. What phrase, what tone, just to know what the coach is repeating. And sometimes you get really, really good answers, but always there's a catchphrase or something. So I'm sitting down. I saw you there, Evan. I was doing those Bally interviews the first week of spring training. So we're sitting there all day and talking to players. And I don't know, 7 or 8 times I asked, what's a good AJ Hinch impression have to include? I got 0 answers. Nobody had enough that was a catchphrase, because he's always got a different message. He's always thinking about something else. He's specific enough that he's not peggable in one like bumper sticker axiom. And I actually think that's kind of the core of who the guy is. And I love that, because you don't know how many times I get a good answer out of that. It never happens that there's not something. So I love that his brain is always firing the way it does. Obviously, wins and losses are going to affect people's opinion of AJ and of Scott and all of that, right, in the long run. But I do believe that what they are doing is very different than everybody else in Major League Baseball in their cohesion, in their understanding of curiosity, right, and their unwillingness to just lean back into old baseball saws because they're easy. There are a lot of old baseball axioms that are good, that need to exist, because relearning what has already worked historically is not always a great idea. Like, you do have to have things from the past. And that's why AJ being in the clubhouse as a player and all that works for him. You don't need me to tell you what his bio is or what Scott is. But that's a large part of why I feel strongly that this team is going to be successful, because I've been around Major League Baseball and I've seen the way teams do things. And I saw it especially very specifically in Chicago. And I just think there's a total difference in how they handle new questions, novel questions. There's a strategy that's novel for just about everything around the corner. And that leads me to how they're talking about depth in camp. I mean, quite often managers play coy because they don't want to say who's on the opening day roster. I firmly believe AJ and Scott actually don't care who's on the opening day roster, that they want everybody in Toledo to know that they're probably going to get used. I mean, we said it on the telecast on Thursday night. The average major league team used 12 and change starting pitchers last year. And I know that's skewed a little bit by double headers or whatever it might be, or spot starts. But that's 2.5 rotations. You have to have depth. And I just think the way they've talked about camp in previous years, even last year, compared to this year, there will be a day in May where we're all at the ballpark and the Tigers use a starter that should have been on the opening day roster, and they beat a team that didn't have that depth. I really believe that's going to happen. We're all going to look at each other and be like, you know what? It's probably good to have 6 of those guys.
And the same is true at third base and other positions as well, right? Like, it all factors in with this concept of depth. Has that stood out to you the most, maybe, compared to everything? I mean, there's a lot we could probably dig into, a lot we could look at, but is the concept of depth and really lengthening their roster, is that stood out to you the most?
That, to me, is the biggest jump this year, along with sort of the like socio-cultural idea that a Jack Flaherty would decide. And again, I don't know what his options were. I do know that he had a couple of other options. I don't know exactly how they crystallized, but Jack Flaherty decided to come to the Tigers because he felt like they could help him. If you become a destination where people feel like they can get educated on themselves, you're kind of going to get free agents pretty quickly, I feel like. I don't know if they're going to be big ticket free agents. I don't know if there's the appetite for that, considering some in the past for the Tigers. I wasn't here for those signings and all of that, but I do know that there have been some hits and some misses. I just think that if you have a larger pool of people to draw from because they want to come to your location because you can make them better, and I know NIL is important to a college football player. I know uniforms are important. I know playing time is important to everybody. But for me, for a professional athlete with a small window of opportunity to get their money and to get their success, they want to go somewhere that they're going to be made better. That is the whole drive of a professional athlete for me right now. And if the Tigers can do that and become a top tier destination, yeah, it's going to get better.
You broadcast 18 or more Tiger games a year versus the White Sox since 2016. Now that you're here, especially some of these young players which predominate the roster, what have you found out since you got here that maybe surprised you? Who's even better than you thought? I mean, you've got a chance to see some of these guys, but now you're seeing them from the inside. You know, they're your home team now. What's surprised you?
You know, Torque and Riley Green and their friendship is hilarious. I'll learn more and more about that future sitcom as we go along. But I was really impressed with Tarek Skubal when we sat down and talked. The way his mind deconstructs pitching and the way he kind of asks himself questions and has developed himself, especially after, you know, the surgery that he didn't know what it was going to be. Right. And then he's kind of taken life by his own reins and decided to remake himself in a couple of ways. And obviously the higher velo and everything that goes along with his mechanical adjustments. But I'm impressed with his mind. I really just like the vibe around the idea. I had always heard from Tampa Bay that their whole deal is that they tell people when they come there, here's the situations you're going to be in. You're not going to play against this left-hander. You're going to be in this type of lineup. And all of those, like, here are the rules of engagement for why we have you. And obviously they churn the bullpen substantially. So I'm talking more position players. But with the Tigers, I do think everybody in that clubhouse, once the roster is set, I think they'll know why they're there. And I really do think that's of high value. And I see it in the demeanor of guys. Like they might behind closed doors be like, I'm better than that guy for this situation or whatever. You don't hear any of that or see any of that. And I don't really get the sense that that happens a ton because, frankly, the Tigers have done a good enough job of saying, if you're like that, we're kind of not going to sign you because we need you to fit into this puzzle. And that's how they see the roster. So, you know, I talked specifically about some players, but I think the one thing that stands out to me is that kind of Rays-ish understanding of what everybody is there for. And I think AJ is really good at communicating that in my early understanding.
Tigers have a style of play now. Evan and I discuss it all the time. And AJ Hinch is very good at communicating that. And, you know, he's very oriented towards optimizing his bullpen. And I think you're gonna see that a lot. So should be pretty interesting. And they've been really good at establishing that for 7 years, not really.
Yeah, I liked playing along with AJ when I did White Sox Tigers games. I mean, frankly, there were a couple years in there that it was way, way, way more fascinating to play along with AJ's logic in the first base dugout.
There's no doubt about it.
Strategically, I think the world of what he does.
He's a different manager, no doubt about it. He's someone that knows in and out. It's just incredible. I've learned so much from him, you know, since he's been the manager of the Tigers and I've been on the beat. As I know you've learned a lot from him over the years as well. But Jason, I started you off with a really hard-hitting question, and now I need to end with a hard-hitting question as well. Do you think the Tigers will win the American League Central in 2024, the first year of Jason Benetti as the Tigers' TV voice?
So nothing better than the what do you think the team's record will be question. But there is one thing better we just learned, pairing it with the arrival of the person you're interviewing and putting him somehow in charge of that success or failure, at least attaching him like a
Pressure's
PDF
on.
to an
Pressure's
email.
on.
Yeah, that's great. No, that makes me want to answer the question more. Absolutely. No, for sure. With Major League Baseball, I can safely tell you I have no idea what anybody's going to do over the course of the season. However, the depth is where you help yourself get better chances to win a division that, if anything I'm an expert at, it's the American League Central, right? Like I have traversed Kansas City, Cleveland, Detroit, Minnesota, and Chicago with the best of them now in two separate places very soon. The Tigers, for me, they're going to be competitive, and there's going to be a very high give a blank factor because these guys are very early in their careers and they want to establish what they are. Like that is important to them and they want to do it together. Is that overblown sometimes? Maybe we could discuss that like psychologically, but I feel like everything is in place for this team to get substantially better individually and as a whole. I know Scott and AJ say the phrase, "We haven't earned it yet." At some point in the middle of this season, it is my hope that they have earned the idea of being in that conversation. And what I will tell you is, from a distance, and you can go watch it on White Sox telecasts from last year, when the Tigers were hanging around and were like 4 or 5 back, I said to Stoney a couple times, like, I might pick the Tigers. If the Twins have a couple of injuries, I might pick the Tigers because I do think that the way they're doing this and how AJ deploys lineups and uses value on the roster, like, I think there's reason to believe that this is going to be a smarter baseball club than your average baseball club. They're going to get value in other places. But like, I got to tell you, for Fox, I've been to Vegas 3 times in the past 5 months for a college basketball game, for a college football game, and for an NFL game. And the last time I was there playing blackjack, the dealer got 4 straight blackjacks or 21s, like either ace queen or 4, 11, 21, right? 4 straight. What are you going to do with that? You can't win, right? So if disaster strikes for some reason, disaster strikes. But if you know how to play the game, you put yourself in the best situation at the table. And I think that's how I think about the Tigers. Did that really make everybody buy season tickets? Probably not. Is it a pretty wonky explanation? Yeah, probably. But I think they're in as good of a situation as anybody in the American League Central for now and for later.
JB, you're an NFL guy. Do you think they remind you a little of the Lions?
There's some of that, just the vibe. There's some of that. But the Lions had that close to last year, right? Where people were like, oh, we've seen it on tape. Like there's reason based on what they did at the end of the previous season. They started, 1-6, and then they got hot late. I don't know that the Tigers have done that yet, but I do think the vibe is similar, the sensibility around it based on my limited understanding from a distance of the Lions. And I would love to see if you could ever finagle this on this podcast, Dan Campbell and AJ Hinch talking to see where like the Venn diagram overlaps. I would kill to see where a conversation with those two meets in the middle.
That might take some work to make happen, but who knows? Maybe we can try to give that a go. It would be interesting to see those two together. Jason, I got one more thing for you. You're about to call a Jackson Jobe game. He's pitching Tuesday against the Minnesota Twins, live on Bally Sports Detroit. Mark and I are about to dig into Jobe a little bit more. But for you, what do you think about that? What do you think about Jobe's stuff? And how excited are you to be able to call, one of his appearances, his first MLB spring training appearance?
I'm pumped. I've heard so much about him. I've heard what players have said about his stuff. I have not watched a bullpen yet, so I do not have firsthand knowledge of what it looks like. But I've heard the stuff is, as they say in baseball clubhouses, electric factory. So let's go see what happens. I'm just excited that there are players that Tigers fans are like, I have to see what this mythical creature is going to bring. And so I can't say I've watched a bullpen yet, so I don't have firsthand knowledge, but I get excited when other people are excited. And then based on the responses I've seen from players who've been in the box, people who've caught him, let's see what it is.
Yeah, we're excited too. So, all right, Jason, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we can have you back on the podcast at some point in the regular season, hopefully at a point where we're looking up and the Tigers have earned that right to talk about winning the American League Central. Hopefully we can have you back on.
That'd be fun. Thank you guys for the good questions. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for starting with the really hard stuff.
Thanks, JB.
Appreciate it.
Take care, guys.
That was play-by-play announcer Jason Benetti, the TV voice of the Detroit Tigers. Mark and I have a lot more to talk about as we wrap up the podcast, including top pitching prospect Jackson Jobe. But first, let's take a quick break.
All I can say about Jason Benetti is the guy, man. How lucky are we to have Jason Benetti in Detroit? One of the best to do it. Just a hell of a guy. Knows so many things. Was so fun to talk to, wasn't he?
It's amazing. He already knows so much about the Tigers, and you feel like it was just yesterday he was hired, and you kind of already wanted to call him like a Tigers legend, if you will, but he's called like 2 spring training games, and that's it. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing him every day at the ballpark, getting to know him, with the Tigers being on the road and stuff like that. There's always so much opportunity to just chit-chat in the dugout, hang out, pick his brain. And this is a smart dude who really knows ball. He's going to bring so much to the home of all Tigers fans all season long and into the future, of course, as well. So I'm looking forward to getting to know him more. I'm looking forward to listening to him more. And he's going to be great, man. He's already knocked it out of the park, and he's going to keep doing it. So that's the best part.
And just as a heads up, there's quite a few games on, and there's quite a few games on between now and the opener on the 28th. So I know the last week there's 3 on. So a lot of chances to listen to Benetti. He's got a new analyst in Carlos Pena to go with the same old guys. So excited to hear what he has to say. All right, we want to touch on some topics. We have a game on Tuesday that we're both very, very excited to see. You got Jackson Jobe going to make his debut in front of all the fans in a major league game Tuesday. You've probably talked to him. Tell us what you know, what you think, and I'll give you some of my viewpoints after you share with us a little bit about what you found out.
Yeah, he's making his big league spring training debut on Tuesday against the Minnesota Twins in Lakeland. Jackson Jobe promised me he was going to let it eat, and he was going to rip some pitches when he gets into his first big league game. So I have high hopes for him. I think he is going to let it eat. There's no doubt about it. There's going to be no, foot on the brake. It's going to be all gas for him in his first game. I'm really excited to see him.
I'll be very curious how long they let him go. Are they going to let him, go 1 inning, or are they going to let him go?
I've been told 1 or 2. So 1 or 2 could mean 1 or 2.
Yeah, like I said, I'll be excited to see it, excited to see his changeup, and just excited to see how he handles the entire environment. Been pretty clear about my feelings about how good I think he can be and when he's going to get recalled. Don't see much reason if he's killing it at Erie and then Toledo to waste innings in the minor leagues for him, even though they have a lot of starting pitching depth. If Jackson Jobe is doing what Jackson Jobe does, he's going to be one of the best 5 starting pitchers they can roll out there. So if the team's doing well, there's not much reason to waste his innings in the minor leagues. So let's move on to some other guys we've seen this week. Some interesting things. I have a few thoughts about it. I want to get yours first. Guys like Brant Herter, who we saw today. Wilmer Flores, one of these 6 Wilmer Floreses, but who's really been pretty spectacular so far this spring, just shocking the hell out of everybody. and Ty Madden, who was pretty damn interesting today. Then we'll get on to Joey Wentz and Alex Fado after. But let's talk about these three guys first, because none of these guys is going to break camp with the Tigers, but good chance we're going to see them all later. So give me your thoughts on them.
Yeah, AAA Toledo could have a really nasty starting rotation at the beginning of the year. If you think about maybe Reese Olsen is the guy who gets the short end of the stick, and he's the number one in Toledo, followed by Alex Fado, backed by Brant Herter and Ty Madden and Wilmer Flores. Like, that can be really fascinating. I really like what I've seen from Brant Herter. He's gotten high praise from people around the organization. His style of pitching, AJ Hinch said it, is exactly what the Tigers preach: controlling the strike zone, commanding multiple pitches, getting ahead. He's working on a new changeup. He's trying to really get that thing going, especially to right-handed hitters. But the sinker slider mix is really good. The command of all of his pitches is solid. He's somebody that the Tigers think could even be a little bit more precise inside the strike zone. So I think that'll be interesting to see as he tracks along. Obviously, he's got the tall build, he's got the good extension. We'll see what ends up coming to him. But again, he's kind of the guy that of that group right there that you had mentioned. Obviously, we're not talking about Jackson Jobe right now. We're talking about Brant Herter, Wilmer Flores, and Ty Madden. Herter looks the most advanced just from a pure strike throwing and kind of complete arsenal ability to be able to go out there and get outs as a starting pitcher type. I think Ty Madden needs that changeup to really be a true starter. Wilmer Flores, I still think he needs a changeup to really be a true starter. Both those guys look more like bullpen options than a Brant Herter, for example. But the Tigers are still planning to have Wilmer Flores as a starter in Toledo. Same with Ty Madden, of course. He's going to be a starter as well. Madden, I think, has more long-term starter possibility potential than Wilmer Flores. So if I were to rank who I think is going to be a starter in the big leagues the quickest, it's probably Brant Herter, then Ty Madden, then Wilmer Flores. That's just me. But all three have stood out in different ways. Wilmer Flores looks like he could be a shutdown reliever at the highest level. He's looked so good. I like everything that I'm seeing there. The fastball is playing up and staying up. That's a good sign.
All right, Brant Herter, my quick observations watching him today kind of evolved the more I watched him. Really liked his stuff, especially his slider. Liked his fastball more than I thought I would, mostly and only because I like the arm angle. Kind of a crossfire, a little bit low arm angle, 3/4 slot, almost lower. And when watching him, especially the third inning I watched him, the thought occurred to me that if he were to pitch a lot more like Eduardo Rodriguez, who just basically tried to bully every right-hand hitter by throwing the ball kind of crossfire in on their hands relentlessly, pitch after pitch after pitch, Herter seemed to struggle a little bit against right-hand hitters. He wasn't fooling anybody. But if he could, against left-hand hitters, his fastball, he was able to dot the corner to his glove side very, very well. And I would try to encourage him aggressively to throw that same pitch to right-hand hitters. You know, as far as Wilmer Flores, that's a bullpen guy right there, dude. I'd make him the closer in Toledo tomorrow. I wouldn't even mess around anymore. I'd go straight for the bullpen, straight for closer, straight for the idea that he could help later. Ty Madden, I'd probably start him. I still think he also is a bullpen guy. If the changeup keeps developing, yeah, he could be more, kind of like his cutter, like a slider a little bit. Fastball plays up. Still think he's a reliever. In fact, more likely than not, if you ask me to make a wager, I think all three of those guys end up in the bullpen. All three of them will pitch this year in Detroit. Let's move on to Joey Wentz, who's out of options, who's thrown pretty well, and Alex Fado, who's the last two times out for sure, thrown really well. Give me a quick analysis on what you're seeing from those two guys.
Both those guys have looked really, really good, which leaves the Tigers in an interesting situation if they keep doing what they're doing, because you mentioned it. Joey Wentz is out of options. We've talked about it numerous times in the podcast. I've written about it a ton of times as well. Alex Fado, however, got a fourth-year option, so he can be shuffled back and forth between AAA and the big leagues this season, whereas Joey Wentz, if the Tigers want to send him down to Toledo, he's got to clear waivers. That means every other team has to take a peek at him. Joey Wentz's stuff has played up out of the bullpen. I thought it looks really, really good in his most recent outing. Alex Fado, like you mentioned, has looked really good in his last two times out. The changeup that he's throwing, the harder version with the new grip, that's a great pitch for him. It's been solid. I think in a perfect world, Like they're both in the big league somehow, some way, but there's just not enough room for everybody. And so if that really is the case, I really do think that it just becomes a game of options, quite literally. I think Joey Wentz makes the opening day roster because he has no options. And Alex Fido goes to AAA Toledo and he works as a starter and he's insurance in case what happens if like 2 or 3 of these guys go down and they need a starter. You got to call on somebody. Alex Fido would probably be that guy. And that makes a lot more sense than moving Joey from a bullpen role back into a starter. Like that's just not going to happen. And look, if Joey Wentz makes the opening day roster and in 3 weeks he's doing terrible and there's just no point in keeping him around, well, then you can cut ties with him. But why not give him a look, give him a little bit of an extended leash, see what he can do for you. And you know what? Maybe having that extra left-hander, maybe that really helps you out. Maybe Tyler Holden takes a step back and regresses a little bit. And you really need that extra lefty now in the bullpen. That's where Joey Wentz could be valuable. So I think there's going to be more of a feeling out situation. And the Tigers are probably going to end up just playing the option game. I think that's the smart move from a front office standpoint. Does that put the best stuff in the bullpen? I guess that could be up for debate based on what we're seeing. But I think when you're looking at one guy with no options and another guy with options, both of them being valuable for completely different reasons, I think you just play the options game and kind of let the cards fall how they may based on performance as the season goes on. But it's tough to say, hey, in 4 weeks of spring training games, Joey Wentz, you're going to be DFA. We're never going to see you again because another team's going to pick him up. He's a tall lefty and his stuff plays up out of the bullpen. There's no question a different team picks up Joey Wentz. So
I think there's probably a pretty big market for Joey Wentz.
For sure.
Regardless of what he did last year, his stuff is seemingly quite different. So let's touch on Joey Wentz for a second, and then we'll get to Fado. His pitch, mostly against minor league hitters, has done well. Not the most what I would refer to as pitch efficient. Had a lot of 3-ball counts, gone deep in a lot of counts.
Well, that's Joey Wentz for you.
Right. But against lesser caliber hitters, you would like to see at least a little better command because once you get into the season, you're facing real guys all the time. Joey Wentz pitching from behind or going into long counts is not a good idea. So I'll be watching that. He was much better about that in, I think, yesterday's outing, which is a good sign. Let's see how he does. He's going to start pitching 2-3 times a week here soon, if not now. So something to pay attention to. Alex Fado hated the first outing. The last outing was, man, that was pretty good. Did a really good job of locating 94 at the top of the zone instead of 92. Breaking ball was really good. New changeup, really, really good. It's obviously probably a contest between him and Brisky. That's a fair way to say it, right?
I disagree, man. I think the new changeup for Alex Fido, I think that dangles the carrot of like, can this guy still be a starter? It just makes you wonder. If no, it really does. And considering the fact that he has those options, I think when I look at Bo Brisky, he is a potential high leverage reliever. I think he is a little bit more proven than Alex Fido in those situations. And again, if you need starter depth, who are we going with? You're going with Alex Fido as starter depth over Bo Brisky. Brisky is more fit to be in the Tigers bullpen on opening day. Alex Fido, I think he's more fit to be starter depth as long as that changeup is where it is right now. If we keep seeing that, I want to see him get stretched out a little bit more. I want to see if he can hold that velo over a longer period of time because he looks like a completely different pitcher with the new changeup and better velocity at the top. The slider's always been amazing. The slider has always been so good for Fido.
Let's take a review of Toledo's rotation. You got Olsen, you got Manning, you got Mize. One of those 3 guys is going down to pitch at Toledo, right?
That's how it seems.
Right. You got Sawyer, Gibson, Long. Now we're up to 2, right?
He's been hurt. It's a slow ramp. I mean, he's not back yet, so we'll see.
But by the start of the year at Toledo, he'll be there.
You'd hope so.
Okay. So you have Kiter Montero, locked for the rotation, right?
It's another name.
Brand Herter, locked for the rotation, right?
Yep.
Okay. So now you got Fado, you got Madden, you got Flores. You can't start them all, brother. So yes, maybe somebody goes to Erie where Job's going to start. But like I said, I think it's not going to be as easy to fit everybody in the rotation at Toledo as we might think. You'd like to avoid sending a guy like Brand Herter back to Erie where he kind of dominated It's not much upside in that. So I'll be interested to see who they make a reliever in Toledo. I think Wilmer Flores is a reliever now. And I wouldn't be shocked if Alex Faedo's a reliever. But
hey, you know what, Mark? These are good problems to have.
You think? It's not like the Avila years, okay? There's no Brent Hanafis going down to Toledo to fill out the rotation anymore.
Hey, Brendan Hanafy was a Scott Harris pickup. Let's not forget that.
Okay, but you understand what I'm saying as far as the caliber of human beings we're dealing with.
Everyone knows what you mean.
I hear you. All right, so lastly, quick, we're going to get out of here. Jay Shung hit a homer this week. He's been playing a lot of second base. Anything to read into that or not?
I don't think so. I asked AJ Hinch about it, and I'm going to take him at his word on it. He said J.C. Young's getting a lot of action at second base because there are guys that are ahead of him in the mix to be third baseman in the big leagues, either on opening day or later on in the season, that are ahead of him in the pecking order. Therefore, he's playing second base, so certain guys can get opportunities at third base. I'm going to take AJ at his word there. I think that tracks with me. Like, it makes sense. So I like the fact that they're prioritizing at bats for Jace Young. That matters more to me than anything.
Plus, I think they want to see Jay Shung play second base so they have an understanding of what it looks like, for heaven's sake. So
pretty good.
He's getting sent out here in another 2-3 days, so they wanted to see it. They got it. They know he's going to play a lot of third base at Toledo, but they wanted to see what he looked like at second, and he actually looked pretty damn good, I thought. So, all right, it's time to get out of here. Covered a lot of stuff. I want to remind everybody to rate, share, subscribe, comment. We always like comments. One day, maybe we'll even do a mailbag. One day. Wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, there are too many more places to listen to these days. You can always find us embedded in the Freep.com sports page or at the Freep. Any article Evan Petzold writes always has the podcast in it. I'd like to thank our executive producers, Kurt Crawford and Anjanette Delgado, and of course, the editor of the Detroit Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols. Our producer, who we made work unnecessarily hard this week, Robin Chan, saves us every damn week. Shout out to my grandson, Braden Michael Gorash, and to the spectacular, super patient, and hopefully coming to see her husband soon, Savannah Petzold. This is Mark Gorash. We'll see you next week. And I'd like to remind everybody, peace.